Schönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome here to North Rhine-Westphalia permanent representation on behalf of Mr. H. Stein, who could not be with us, unfortunately. I am going to be the expert here for energy and climate policies. I want to welcome you. I'm happy to do so. After the corona situation, it's nice to see you all here in person. And from my background, I can just say that we have a very exciting topic to address this evening. Decarbonisation industrial clusters is a topic, a hot topic nowadays, especially considering your Commission's package on the topic. We can see renewable energies being focused upon, and I think that's why we have a very exciting evening ahead of us. We have some very high-level people here among us. We have Mr. Pinfat from North Rhine-Westphalia, whom is responsible for the energy process in North Rhine-Westphalia. I will finish up with that. I wish you a very fruitful debate and a nice evening. Thank you. Good evening. Hello from me too, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is, I am a moderator, freelancer, and I'm very happy to accompany you here this evening. You already mentioned the headline, FitFor55, decarbonisation and value creation in industrial clusters. That's what we're speaking about today. And I am very happy to welcome you here in person, but also our guests whom are online this evening. So some
English-speaking audience, the whole event will be simultaneously interpreted, so the interpretation is below the screen in the description. Ja, meine Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, 5055, that is the package that the European Commission last summer presented. Measures are within for climate neutrality, for our economic situation in Europe, climate neutrality by 2050. Since then, a lot has happened. Given the war in Ukraine, perspectives have changed to a certain degree when it comes to energy security.
Und ich glaube, das hat natürlich auch noch mal deutlich gemacht, dass die Energiewende nicht nur ein Klimaschutzprojekt ist, sondern auch ein Sicherheitsprojekt. Es ist viel in Bewegung gekommen, haben wir gerade auch schon gehört. Im April kam das Osterpaket Fit for 55. Jetzt hat die Europäische Kommission mit Repower EU geantwortet auf die neuen Herausforderungen. Und wir wollen heute insbesondere schauen, welche Chancen und Risiken sich durch Fit for 55, Risiken, Herausforderungen natürlich auch besser formuliert, ergeben, insbesondere auch für NRW und welche Rolle Wasserstoff spielen kann. Dazu hören wir zwei Statements. Wir gehen in einen kurzen Talk und in eine etwas längere Podiumsrunde. Und an der Stelle für Sie schon mal die herzliche Einladung. Sie können sich gerne beteiligen hier in der Panel-Diskussion. Wir würden uns natürlich freuen, wenn Sie den Abend hier mitgestalten durch Ihre Fragen. Jetzt gebe ich aber zunächst mal ab an Sonja Clarena Baron. Frau Baron ist stellvertretende Generalsekretärin EU Turbines und wird Sie jetzt sozusagen als Mitgastgeberin begrüßen. Herzlich willkommen, Frau Baron.
Ja, vielen Dank. I'm going to continue in English. It is actually much easier for me to do so, so I hope you can still all follow me. So first of all, of course, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Certainly refreshing to have a room full of people in front of me and not the screen, so that's already a big change. And speakers and very interesting discussions. I'm sure we will hear about a lot of different options and solutions that can contribute to decarbonization. So I would just like to take a couple of minutes to talk about EU turbines and the technology that we actually represent. So on that, as EU Turbines, we believe that all solutions have a part, and that everything that can contribute to decarbonization and to the energy transition should be supported. Now, one of those solutions for us, of course, is the turbine technology, and on that, turbines can certainly provide also clean power and heat as needed. And why do we believe that that is such an important component is because, of course, we have increasingly challenge that will increase, sorry for the repetition there, as more renewables are being introduced into the system. And we will have more challenges on that, especially when it comes to long-term and large-scale storage. So on that, when we have hydrogen storage together combined with turbine power plants, we have a solution that can also help in the transition and into the decarbonization. Now, how we do that, how our members are doing that is by offering H2-ready technology. With that, what we achieve is that investments in the much-needed new flexible power plant capacity is also future-proof, and that it's aligned with the climate goals of the European Union, not only now, but also in the future. For that, what that means actually is, of course, that the new installation will be able to adapt to the use of hydrogen once those amounts are available. And also in the similar way, we have existing plans that generally can also be retrofitted for that purpose. So to that end, as EU Turbines, we have developed a definition of what H2-ready for our technology means, so that we can also have a common understanding of what we need and what we are talking about. And on that note, I invite you all to have a look at our website, where you would also find that specific definition. Now, what does that mean? Is that the technology is ready, is available, but we certainly still need the amounts of hydrogen, as well as, of course, a business model that makes sense and that encourages also investors to invest in our technology. And so looking at the discussions on the Fit for 55 package, of course also about the gas and hydrogen package, as well, of course, as with the Repower EU communication and plan, there are a couple of things that I would just like to raise as key aspects for our technology and our industry. And in that sense, the EU needs to, first of all, of course, accelerate the production of hydrogen. We need the amounts now, yesterday even. We need to further develop the hydrogen infrastructure, but not only at a central level, but also decentralized. So we need, for example, that smaller scale cogeneration plants also have access to hydrogen, so that they can also deliver power and heat as needed. Third, we also need to have an integrated planning approach that does not only look at the gas and hydrogen grid, but that it also takes into account the electricity, the heat network, and that it really encompasses all the energy system needs, so that we can also have the most efficient way forward. And finally, certainly the most important for us as EU Turbines would be the fact that we need the EU to also acknowledge the role of power plants also in the future, and ensure that hydrogen also reaches the power plants. So in our view, certainly there are also other users of hydrogen that also are very important, but we do not think that the approach of prioritizing certain customers or certain sectors is the right way forward. So to conclude, our industry is certainly doing its part. So we are ready. Now we still being ready is not enough. So we actually need to kickstart the hydrogen economy so that we can also be able to deliver renewable power and heat. That would be all from my side. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Sonia Clarina Baron, for your statements. Ladies and gentlemen, North Rhine-Westphalian is an energy state, high energy industry and economy. A perfect area for decarbonisation, and that's why we have a particular role when it comes to innovative, climate-friendly strategies and technologies and their development. There is a lot to do in order to achieve climate neutrality, and we would have been very happy to have had Mr. Pinkvat with us, whom was to come here to Brussels, but who was called for a cabinet meeting this morning and couldn't travel in the end. Nevertheless, he did send us a video message, and we are now going to show it to you. So, here we are.
Dear Mr. Stein, dear Miss Baron, ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to wish a warm welcome to anyone present in the presentation of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, and of course also a warm welcome to anyone participating, just like I do, remotely online. Our topic is a very current topic. There are multiple challenges that we have to face. We have to diversify our energy imports. We have to strategically organize the transformation of our industry to keep industrial value creation in Germany and in Europe. For our state, as an industrial hub in Germany and in Europe, it's of crucial importance that we find solutions that allow us to tackle all challenges simultaneously. We are well set up for this in North Rhine-Westphalia. We have a hydrogen roadmap, an action plan for synthetic fuels, and a carbon management strategy. And these three approaches have a shared message. Climate protection and economic opportunities go together. You will never again encounter the one without the other. And on our way towards climate neutrality, we have to rethink our value chain. We have to use and expand upon our strength in North Rhine-Westphalia. We have good infrastructure in North Rhine-Westphalia. We also have good research possibilities and innovative companies of any size and of all sizes. An example of those innovative companies is our host today, MAN, a company with a long and storied tradition that is becoming a key player in the hydrogen economy. In North Rhine-Westphalia, we have several concrete projects that are already underway in the hydrogen sector, especially important projects of common European interest. One of those is GET-H2. GET-H2 has the goal to become the first publicly accessible hydrogen network, which is what we need as quickly as possible nowadays. There are several individual projects that connect production of green hydrogen in Lingen and in the Netherlands with industry clients in Saxony and in North Rhine-Westphalia. And this also guarantees access for North Rhine-Westphalia and the northern German states to access to the hydrogen pipeline network, which is, of course, a strategic advantage for future hydrogen imports. And we also have a key strategic project to be connected to the Netherlands, to be in the center of the future European hydrogen economy. And next to strategic infrastructure reforms, we've also put a lot of effort into future projects that increase the demand for climate-neutral hydrogen, and as such promote a climate-neutral transformation of our industry. One of those projects is climate-neutral steel and using hydrogen in the chemical industry. And those are flagship projects. in order to transform and to promote transformation in our industrial hubs and can serve as a blueprint for future projects. We also want to create incentives for domestic hydrogen production and to increase potential for facility construction. For example, we want to set up an electrolyzer production in the Rhine area, and with our great framework conditions in North Rhine-Westphalia, we were able to attract 3 new companies, hydrogen tech companies. Inepta from Italy will have a site in Saarbeck, and they're currently building an electrolyzer construction site over there, one of the most modern in the world. Plug Power has moved to Duisburg, next to the Ruhr, and it's one of the leading American hydrogen startup companies. And Cummins from the US is coming to Herten. So 3 great examples for successful companies moving to North Rhine-Westphalia. Furthermore, we've been able to set up 2 research sites in North Rhine-Westphalia, Duisburg research site, and the Helmholtz cluster for sustainable and infrastructure-compatible hydrogen economy. And the research center, as a part of the research center in Jülich, and both of these research areas will be supported by Germany with €1 billion in research grants. We have 9 model regions in North Rhine-Westphalia that are pushing districts to promote hydrogen and hydrogen mobility in their area. They're all profiting from the federal promotion that Germany is giving. And we're talking about ramping up hydrogen economy. We're talking about European and global cooperation. The European Commission is responsible for a great deal of the regulatory framework conditions for this, which is why we need clarity for the companies, and that as quickly as possible in order to be able to do proper planning. And if we look at the so-called IPSAL projects, we're also looking at the regulations for state aid, where the EU is once again playing a key part. So these authorizations have to be made available as quickly as possible. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, North Rhine-Westphalia is a pioneer as far as hydrogen is concerned, but at the same time we're facing challenges when ramping up the hydrogen economy. I, for one, am convinced that we can overcome these challenges and can harness the opportunities that come with these challenges. Today's event is a great platform and a great opportunity to networking across the whole value creation chain that comes with hydrogen and with politicians knowledgeable on that topic. And saying that, I hope you'll have a great exchange and a productive discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Ja, das war.
Yes, that was Minister Pinkford with a video message here for us. He just said it. The European Commission is responsible for the regulation vis-à-vis the reaching of our climate goals. Fit for 55 lays out specific measures to reach a European climate-neutral economic situation. Repower EU came about just 2 weeks ago under the DG for energy, together with different DGs. It's not so easy to have an overview over all the proposals and ideas that are at play. We are very happy to hear from our next guest, Mr. Tudor Constantinescu, the Principal Advisor to the Director General for Energy in the European Commission. And perhaps he will be able to give us an overview on the new plans. A warm welcome to you, sir.
Danke schön, guten Abend, but I think I will switch to English because otherwise it would be quite a short intervention. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be with you here today, and thank you very much to you, Turbine, for the invitation, as well as to Rhine-Westphalia for organizing this event. It's indeed very timely, and from as much as I could understood, it's definitely something which you secure quite a strong leadership in Europe, and it's very important for moving ahead the hydrogen agenda, not only to move ahead with the energy transition and with the Repower EU plan, which we have recently launched in answer to the war of Russia in Ukraine. Now, but this being said, as I said, I'm very pleased to be with you, and to start a little bit to say that actually all what's going now is very much in line with the Green Deal. The Green Deal, which was the first major project launched by this Commission, by the President von der Leyen, with the aim to make Europe the first carbon neutral continent. But it's not just to make Europe the first carbon neutral continent. It was about how to accelerate and in such a way that by 2030 we reduce the greenhouse gas emission reductions, the greenhouse gas emissions, we reduce them in such a way as to avoid investing in what would become later on stranded assets or what would generate lock-in effects. So an acceleration of investments in modernizing the economy, in modernizing the energy infrastructure which was aging in Europe, and actually in making in this way a more efficient, affordable, sustainable and competitive energy system. Now, one of the first things we have done for the Green Deal was the two communication and energy system integration, looking at more innovative approaches in the energy system, and the hydrogen strategy, both very much interlinked and which came at the same time, reinforced by a partnership which was the Clean Hydrogen Alliance partnership, which you will hear definitely later on from my colleague Henning. They came as some first pieces of legislation because we saw that to decarbonize by 2050, the final energy consumption will be moderated, decreased, but then if we look at how it will be, the final energy consumption by then, the share of electricity will increase from perhaps 25% now to about half by that time. But still half will be based on molecules and not on electrons. So we need to decarbonize this part. And then we have biogas, we have biomethane, but still it's not enough. We need hydrogen, we need synthetic fuels, we need synthetic gas, and therefore this key role for hydrogen in the energy transition. Next, of course, to renewables, to energy efficiency, which are the core of the energy transition. And this hydrogen strategy, from what I understood Mr. Minister speaking, it came also very much with an industrial strategy as well. So it's about investments in the green energy transition. And if we look, for example, at electrolyzers, we are speaking the strategy to invest 40 billion euros, but to invest 200 to 300 billion euros in renewables and other 60 billion euros in infrastructure. So all this is an investment agenda to create demand and supply, plus research and innovation, plus, of course, the international dimension, which now becomes even more important in the current context. To materialize the Green Deal and to materialize these strategies, of course, we needed to put not only investments in place, and which is tried through the recovery EU plans, which very much were triggered by the COVID crisis, and after that to start economic recovery. And these were unprecedented budget, but even this we knew and we know would not be enough. So we need to attract private investments, we need to make another business model for the European economy, and therefore we need a framework in which these new energy solutions can work, including hydrogen. And this is a Fit for 55 with 13 legislative initiatives which were launched in the summer of last year, plus a hydrogen and gas decarbonization package which was launched in December. First of all, it was, of course, about energy efficiency and new targets, about renewables and new targets, but we didn't do a recast of the renewables directive. We looked at the sectors, heating and cooling, industry, transport, where the penetration of renewables was lower and where we needed to accelerate, actually, the penetration of renewables. And here are the sectors where also hydrogen has a major role to play. That's why the target of 50% renewable hydrogen in industry or 2.6 in transport. These were accompanied by, of course, other pieces of legislation like infrastructure, alternative infrastructure regulation and the refueling stations, both for electric vehicles and for hydrogen ones, every 150 kilometers for hydrogen, every 60 for electric vehicles, plus the revision of the ETS, deepening on one hand and expanding it to other sectors on the other hand, including for electrolyzers, including now maritime and aviation. On aviation also introducing after 2030, starting modestly 0.7%, but still starting synthetic fuels. In maritime, having a target of reducing greenhouse gas emission reductions by about 13%, and then also to use all these new synthetic fuels in this respect, plus to decarbonize the whole activities related to the shipping, but also to the ports, which is, again, something which is relevant, because when we speak about ports are, of course, the coastal ports, which are very close to industrial areas, but as we see in North Rhine-Westphalia, there are also fluvial ports, and it's very important. Also with the industrial clusters, hydrogen can have a major role to decarbonize and to link, actually, and to create corridors also across Europe, which very much are, to a certain extent, at least covered by the important project of common European interest idea, but which have to expand. And in this discussion on hydrogen, very much we accentuate hydrogen valleys, and we will need to have more of them. And now with REPowerEU, by the way, just as a little break in the presentation, we try to reinforce this dimension as well, and with over 200 million euros in addition to what we had under the Clean Hydrogen Partnership, to stimulate these valleys and to interconnect them, these valleys across Europe. And when we speak about interconnecting them, it was the second part of the Fit for 55. It's a performance of buildings directive, but also with the hydrogen and gas decarbonization, where we really try to see how renewable gases can better penetrate in our economy, how hydrogen can do it better, how to ensure in some cases a blending, how to mainly, because this is most effective, repurpose at least the transmission levels, the gas infrastructure, and make use of the assets we have for the energy transition in the most cost-effective way. All these things were, as I said, advancing, and together with the certification and the other dimensions on a very ambitious pathway. But now, with the war in Ukraine, everything seems to be pale compared to the new ambitions we need to have. And to increase here is not only about having more ambitious targets, it's about how we can manage to achieve these targets. What kind of policies, what kind of measures, what kind of projects we can put in place. And I think this is an essential dimension on which we have actually to work together and to build on the partnerships we have created. Now, if we manage with hydrogen, just 12, 15 years ago, we had electrolyzers of 10 kilowatts. It was a top record. I remember when in Köln, on the Shell refinery, to launch the first 10 megawatt in Europe project. And now we speak about 100 megawatts, and there are several projects on their way being materialized. So this was achieved through a partnership between research, industry, the Commission. Now, the partnership is now enlarged to more industrial companies, and you'll hear more about that. But it's also very much about partnership between regions. It's also partnership between member states and trying to create this market. Because the accelerator we have now under REPowerEU speaks about almost doubling the domestic production of renewable hydrogen. We had 5.6 million tons under the Fit for 55 to achieve the targets we have for industry and for transport. So now we speak extra 5 million in Europe, plus possibilities to import 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen. Of course, has to be renewable hydrogen. For this, we need a system of certification which to be also globally accepted, and we work on this, on global initiatives with the International Partnership for Hydrogen Economy, with the Clean Energy Ministerial, with Mission Innovation, and we are partnering there with other countries around the world, but also very much being supported by member states. We are active, like Netherlands, Germany in particular, in these global initiatives on hydrogen. So we need to make sure that hydrogen will play its role in this system, and next to, of course, energy efficiency. And for this, we'll need more renewables. We'll need more renewables, and when we say more renewables, under Fit for 55, we had doubled the target from what we had now, 20% to 40%. This translates in about 65% electricity renewables in the energy system. Now, with the new targets, perhaps will be over 70. So we need flexibility. We need flexibility. This means we need flexible power generation. We need to decarbonize the backup of the energy system, of the power generation system. It's absolutely essential if it is to achieve decarbonization. And for this, hydrogen is basically becoming more and more important, as it is to make sure that de facto, so what we have now, the capacity mechanism and all the issue also of prices can then be through large-scale storage and so better handled, and we'll explore all these pathways and we'll have to secure all these pathways. In short term, of course, we need to diversify supply to bring LNG, but gradually we'll need and to make energy savings, but gradually the structural investments in energy efficiency, in renewables, in power generation, and in alternative fuels, in synthetic fuels and hydrogen will be key to succeed for the REPowerEU and for the longer term objectives we have. So again, thank you for the invitation. Very happy, and I will hope to have some headphones to be able to understand what I cannot catch through my little German. So, and very pleased to be with you here tonight, and very, very good to mobilize this community and trying to play this exemplary role also on the European scene. Thank you again for the invitation.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Free to use the English interpretation if you like. Oh, there you are. Okay. You're welcome. Ja, meine Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a look at the steel industry now that, of course, in terms of the EU plans, plays a central role. It creates some of the largest emissions in the world, 6% in Germany of all emissions in the year. So once again, there is a desire to make this climate neutral. We're going to look at what role hydrogen can play in steel production and how far NRW is along this path already. I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Daniela Jansen, excuse me, says the speaker. These things happen. Political secretary of the IG Metal Board, member of the supervisory board of ThyssenKrupp. Welcome. And of course, applause always helps. And I would also like to welcome Dr. Uwe Laube, CEO of MAN Energy Solutions SE, and member of the German National Hydrogen Council. A warm welcome to both of you. Please come to the stage. I hope you can forgive me for mixing up your names. No problem at all. My wife's name is Daniela, actually. So her name is Daniela Lauber, also blonde. But please, no rumors. So confusing. So, Ms. Jansen, I just said the steel industry in Germany is responsible for 6% of all CO2 emissions. At the industrial level, it's 13%. 30% rather. So there is huge potential here for decarbonization if it's successful in order to produce, if we can manage to produce green steel in the future. How far are we along in that? Thank you so much for the question that you positively formed in terms of the potential that the steel industry has in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. All steel companies in Germany have already started, essentially. Look at Gitter AG, for example. They have a new value chain established. They have wind power turbines that can produce hydrogen, and then this hydrogen can produce green steel. ThyssenKrupp, the company that I am involved in to a certain degree, are also on the way. Together with TK H2 Steel, have started to make steps, and in 2025 they want to have a proper facility set up for this. Same for Saarstahl AG. They have a project underway. ArcelorMittal and Hamburg are fairly well along the way. They have a smaller capacity, but they have a complete green facility. They produce 100,000 tons of green steel. As such, they are a good way down the path. We spoke about the potential in terms of emissions. We have a blow oven, and if we look at what we can, 10% of the German population of Germany, if they were to eat vegetarian manner, then we could save the same amount of emissions. We can see there's a huge potential here in terms of CO2 reduction. But in order for the operations to happen, you need to have a lot of hydrogen, no? As such, could you maybe give us an overview in terms of what amounts we're speaking about here? I had a nice example that I came across in terms of what gas balloons are needed in order to have a complete reduction in a facility. Yes, here you may know the gasometer in Oberhausen. You need to fill it twice in order to produce green steel with hydrogen. We're speaking of a large quantity here. For the steel industry, you need 130 extra terawatt hours to create green energy steel. Imagine that. We're speaking about huge amounts here now that we need to use. If we don't have any green energy or green infrastructure, then we're not going to be able to progress. That's a big problem. This is a cross-sectorial problem. Actors in the railway industry, those in associated subsidiaries whom want to use hydrogen to fill their vehicles have the same problems. There is not enough hydrogen available, simply. And this is a big problem. Dr. Lauber, what does that mean for procurement then? Where are we supposed to get the hydrogen? We won't be able to produce it in Germany to that degree. Yes, in these amounts that we need, no, of course not. In Germany, industry in machinery production, etc., can play a pioneering role here. Electrolysis allows for us to produce hydrogen. We could be speaking about different types of gases here, etc., but in any case, hydrogen is a global topic. This is something that we have to be all clear upon. You've been very clear yourself. We do not have so many renewable sources, so where are we supposed to get them from? We need to go and address areas where we can do this in a reasonable manner in terms of cost, etc. Look at Australia, for example. We could cover a lot of hydrogen if we apply things properly. We have the technologies. We could bring such technology to where it's necessary, be that the Middle East, etc. That's where we need to have hydrogen factories. Gigawatt factories need to be built so that hydrogen can be properly produced. Once again, though, is the question, how can we get that hydrogen to Germany? It needs to be cooled to a very high degree. We're speaking about minus 200 degrees here in order to transport hydrogen. Pipelines is not the best idea either. That means we need to manipulate the hydrogen where it is so that we can use it here and we can transport to Germany. The Middle East, for example, has a lot of gas. We need gas right now, given the Ukraine crisis. We need to be able to produce. We need to have global partnerships with these countries, for example. It's not too far away. Look at Tunisia and Morocco. Well, we have sun in high quantities. We need to produce energy there. And then we need to look at how we can transport it to the end user. For me, it's important to, and you mentioned it previously, There are endless discussions we can have here on hydrogen, but who is getting the hydrogen at the end of the day? There are branches in industry that have no other alternative. Look at the aviation industry, steel industry, shipping. They need hydrogen. Where electrolysis can be used directly, like in the car industry, do it immediately, please. Don't go into a transition phase. We have alternatives. The others do not have any in the long term. That's why we need to set our priorities. The need for electricity is enormous. An example from the marine industry, for example. The shipping industry is responsible for 300 tons of Arctic heavy fuel. And we need to be able to replace this because these extremely large containers, and if we are to power them with batteries, I mean, if we're going around the world here, it's almost impossible, isn't it? Imagine if we could operate these 100% with electricity. If we're speaking of thousands of containers, well, then we won't be able to do it because the batteries will be too big that it won't work. The ships will be too heavy with the batteries, they'll just sink. I was at a conference in Hamburg, and it really was food for thought. We need to try and rethink things. These 300 million tons that I mentioned, if we are to use synthetic gas, if we were to use just 1%, if we could just replace 1%, 1 million tons of hydrogen, 6 or 7 million carbon dioxide, and the electrolysis would be 60 terawatt hours to deal with this. That's just 1%. The fundamental problem here is how we can ramp up renewable energies. Look at the prices now as they are problematic. We need to have a different solution. We need to have a different starting point. We need to have a proper business model. What are the important steps for you so for this to become a proper business case that in terms of steel production? Now, right now, unfortunately, we have to say that given the Ukraine situation, we have a whole new dimension when it comes to energy. We need to be very clear here. There's so much more pressure now than there was before. What's very important now is that across Germany, we need to ramp up hydrogen use. That's why a business case would make sense. We need to have proper frameworks for that, though. We're in Brussels now, so allow me to say right now it's quite difficult. We have proposals. We've already put them on the table. We're going to have consultations on them next week. We've already spoken with IG Metal so that these new instruments, CBAM, can be used so that carbon leakage can be avoided, not vice versa. Right now, ETS certificates may not be used before they're even assessed properly. We're not happy with that. And we hope that the proposal from the Energy Committee can be properly implemented. Otherwise, we fear that companies will simply not have enough money in order to invest in the transformation. We just heard how much money is necessary, how much energy, how much hydrogen is necessary. And of course, when it comes to steel production, we need to ensure that production can occur. Now, if we look at ETS and we add this to the whole situation, then we just will not have enough money in order to invest where it's necessary. And for us, that's why it's so important that these carbon leakage protection measures will protect companies that need it. We need to tell companies ahead of time and we need to ensure that they can properly transform themselves. Like it won't work from one day to the next. I would like to add something else here now, a different topic. Ramping up hydrogen, restructuring is not just an economic question, but also a social question. In RW, a lot of jobs are linked to this, to downstream branches, etc. When it comes to this, how much jobs are we talking about? It's quite difficult, to be honest. As a politician, it's very difficult to give a precise figure. In the steel production, we're speaking of thousands and thousands of jobs in NRW. You can multiply this across the country when it comes to all different services associated with this. This is a huge amount. There's a study that was commissioned by the NRW Economic Ministry. We're speaking here of hundreds of thousands of jobs that could come about, though, by 2050. So here, the study is assuming that the jobs will come either in storage technology or in the manufacturing of storage capacities, or those who will work in renewable energies, although we don't know how this will work for other workers. And this is not just with the procedural measures. We're going to have different requirements down the line, because there are so many complexities at play here. Now, those who have to operate these machines that we're going to be needing, of course, will need to be skilled too. Those who work in transportation. There will be changes to employment, the nature of their employment, and reskilling is going to be necessary, of course. We will have a study, hopefully released in autumn, that looks at this question, and we will be able to tell you how many jobs are going to be affected, hopefully, at that point. We can't just say we're going to give $1 billion for a particular sector, but we need to know what's happening with that money. Reskilling, further development. But ultimately, what's going to happen is quite difficult to really estimate all of this. So it's speculation at the end of the day, essentially, what we're speaking of right now, aren't we? When we look at the international competitive level, for example, there's always this question of speed. There are countries that have been investing in green hydrogen for many, many years now, like the USA, for example. What do you believe? What's the risk that Germany will fall behind in terms of international competitiveness? How much pressure do we need to place right now? I believe pressure is the optimal word here. Mr. Pinkelwitz said this too. German facilities and engineering need to be able to produce. We need to have proper facilities that can use electrolysis, synthetic reactors. We need to build proper facilities, and of course, hydrogen factories need to be built too. And the risk, though, that I see here associated with all of this is linked to how we are all shouting out that it needs to be quicker. But I see the opposite. Let me give you an example. We bought a company 2.5 years ago, a startup company. Maybe you're right about this. In the company, by 2030, we're going to invest 450 million. That's something. That's really something. And if you do this, then you have to have business plans, and we need to have timelines. Until what point will you have X, Y, Z done? New technologies here in Germany, in order to rather building these and ramping all of this up, is a challenge. Look at the hydrogen need, for example. That's why we need to offer support. And we need to be able to test everything at the end of the day as well. We have to be able to do what we promise. Now, Releasing hydrogen into the air could be a mistake. Look at the example from before. 1%, 1 million. That's associated with 6 tons already. We have to find a place in Germany where we can do this. If we are going to use hydrogen to power chemical plants, look at the authorities whom have to give approval. I'm not blaming them. They have their rules. What else are they supposed to do? I'm saying that we need to move away from these rules and have ways to work around it so that we are able to act here and get things up and going.
And the LNG terminal has clearly shown, because Minister Habeck was exerting a lot of pressure to really set this up, and this cannot be the regular case. We need to speed up the procedures for authorizations for new technologies. Our clients, our customers, when they come to us in Augsburg, there are 2 containers. There are 2 electrolysis installations that are ready to start. They cannot be taken in, they cannot be started because for 12 months now, governments have been discussing authorizations. There is somebody operating a wind farm who wants to do something good. He says, I'm just going to buy this ready-to-use electrolyzer. I set it up next to the wind park. And instead of just turning off my wind turbines when the energy network is overloaded, I'm just going to produce hydrogen. And he said, and he was buying this early because, and it'll take 8 months for this to be done. And he ordered it and said, in 8 months I'll have my authorization. And he didn't get it. This has been sitting there for 12 months, and we're still talking about speed. We have to take this seriously. How can we keep up with international competition? Because other countries are a lot faster for this. Authorization procedures have to be sped up. We have to take this seriously. We cannot simply throw in these new technologies and try to handle them according to established procedures. We have to develop new procedures that allow us to ramp up quickly. Otherwise, we will never reach our goals for 2030. I would also like to ask you, is this a core topic for you as well? Too slow, too bureaucratic, too complicated to get an authorization? Yes, of course that's the case most of the time, but we have some political levels where all of this is happening, different political levels. On the federal level in Germany, I see there's a lot of movement happening there. The coalition treaty of the government has recognized the ramp up, that we have a higher need for electricity, that we need a ramp up for hydrogen, and it took a lot of time for the federal government to accept how high the need for power in the industry in Germany actually is. And now this has been fixed in the coalition treaty in the German government. It's something we have been demanding for a long time. We're quite happy to see it there. On the European level, Mr. Pinkwart has already mentioned it. We have the so-called IPSEC projects that have to be authorized as quickly as possible because they contain the grants, the funding for the companies. And me, as a supervisory council member of ThyssenKrupp, would not agree with an investment if we cannot get a price for the product that we're supposed to produce with that. So the companies need to be able to plan properly so that they know that they can sell the product they're trying to set up to produce. There has to be a business case. That's very important, and for that we need faster authorizations. I'm fairly certain that that call to action has been heard. I would like to thank you very much, Ms. Janssen. Mr. Lauber, you'll stay with me for a little longer because we're going to directly move to our panel discussion. Once again, thank you, and a round of applause for Ms. Janssen. Thank you for being here. Now, some of the topics that have already been addressed can be tackled again during our panel discussion. I would like to call to the stage our next guests, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Sagnasuri, COO, Hydrogen RWE Generation, Henning Ehrenstein, Deputy Head of Energy Intensive Industries Raw Materials, from DG GROW, also Jens Geier, member of the European Parliament, rapporteur for EU hydrogen strategy. And I'd like to welcome all 3 of you to the stage. Please join us. Have a seat. Mr. Ehrenstein, the European Commission, I'm just going to pass you the mic because this one is for you. So the European Commission has launched a lot of packages recently, Fit for 55, Repower EU, and there's also declaration of intent for different companies. As Mr. Pinkwart has already mentioned, the initiative European Clean Hydrogen Alliance. Now, if you look into all of that as someone who's not an insider, just looking into that initiative and the goals that are being formulated there, that would mean that if all of this comes to pass, in reality, this would mean that we would have to increase hydrogen production by a factor of 60 within the European Union. And those are very ambitious goals in all packages. How can this be implemented? This is realistic at all. This is pure science fiction. Good evening to all of you. It's my great pleasure to be here. Science fiction. Now, I work for Commissioner Breton, who is also an author of science fiction books, as you may know. But our goals, we do not consider them science fiction. They are ambitious goals, however. But we have no other choice. We have heard it multiple times. I don't have to go into detail on this, but Fit for 55, the agenda that goes along with it, the war in Ukraine, we have to set ambitious goals, and ambitious goals help all of us in the industry, as well as in the Commission and in the member states, to mobilize enough energy to move on forward, and instead of talking about what should be done, but to actually do things. Mr. Geyer. Now, if we look at this from the perspective of the European Parliament and your role as a rapporteur on the European Union hydrogen strategy, you know all of these packages quite well. And energy prices were already quite high last year, had already increased significantly last year. Now the war has happened on top of that. What do you say as the energy rapporteur? Are we on the right path? Without an alternative is an expression that has been used a lot, and I'm very prudent before I only use it cautiously, but it is the proper term here. There is no alternative. We want to move out of fossil fuels in order to protect our climate. We want to move out of fossil fuels even faster now, out of Russian fossil fuels, to be precise, because we are in a situation of a very unhealthy dependence on those fossil fuels from Russia. And I'm responsible for Duisburg and Oberhausen, the sites I've already mentioned before. And what we're trying to do here is changing the wheels on a train going at full speed. And that is, of course, not an easy thing to do. On a political level, we can see that the gears are grinding a little. They're simply not as frictionless as you might hope it would be. And it's the job of politicians here to grease the wheels, to make sure that things can move forward smoothly. And Daniela Janssen has spoken about Fit for 55. We will get the first package to the plenary, and I wouldn't say that I agree with everything that's in there. I was part of the compromises in the industry committee more than those in the environmental committee, and I've really upset my colleagues in my parliamentary group that if I can get a reasonable compromise in the industrial committee and an unreasonable compromise in the environmental committee, and I had to find a compromise between these two compromises. Where do I end up? This, of course, like I said, upset my colleagues, but this doesn't change anything about the fact that we have to accelerate and ramp up production of renewable energies, that we have to develop business cases for this. There's a report that I will present in a few weeks on the new gas market regulation. And we also need to ramp up regulations and regulatory measures. We have to work on all levels. I don't disagree with anything that has been said here, especially not. I especially don't disagree with the high quantity of, with the colossal amounts of hydrogen that we need to import. We have to work on all levels at once. Yes, that's exactly, it's a challenge. Dr. Suri, you have to handle the regulatory parts of this, but you also have to have a holistic approach and perspective. RWE believes in expensive green hydrogen because you are the head of a whole department responsible for this. Well, we've heard from the speakers prior to us that hydrogen will be an important factor because we simply cannot electrify everything. There are limits to this. Ms. Janssen has mentioned, and the steel industry needs the molecules. Why green hydrogen? Because simply it's on the long term the only variety of hydrogen that is sustainable, and we want a world that is climate neutral in Europe for 2050. So this is the only development that makes sense. You've mentioned a cost factor. And Dr. Lauber has already presented this earlier at the very beginning of a new industry. This is costly, but we have other technologies. If we look at photovoltaics of wind power, we've had a huge cost revolution in the last 10 to 15 years, and we will see the same thing happening in green hydrogen. But we will only achieve these results if we can move forward, because the high-scale hydrogen generation projects can actually be implemented. Happen. Goals are wonderful, but goals alone will not do anything. They're just a guiding light, a northern light, a star. But we need a guiding hand. We need a regulatory framework, and we need funding. Especially because in the beginning of a new industry, investment cost on the capital side is quite high. And if a company doesn't have a business case, any supervisory council would shoot that down. We need to have the possibility to adjust on all levels for this, in order to cooperate as a group of several companies to promote and push forward green hydrogen projects in order for them to become competitive. Dr. Lauber, speaking about the regulatory framework, you have described that hydrogen should be produced where the sun is shining, where we can build sufficiently large electrolysis installations. And there's a point in Repower EU that's been reacted to with some criticism because there are a lot of details in the rules for electrolysis installations outside of the EU that are not currently in business with the EU, and that is a huge challenge to fulfill all of these requirements as they're being proposed now. What's your position on these requirements? Now, on a fundamental level, details, regulations, and requirements are always an obstacle. It's a lot of administrative work to fulfill these requirements as they're being set. But I think we could discuss this for thousands of hours and have thousands of debate. We simply have to start, even if it's not satisfying for everyone. What we have in here, what's worrying me a little bit, is that there is a bit of a contradiction to the ramp up, is that only non-promoted renewable energies can be taken after 2026 to produce hydrogen and to produce electricity. And this is contrary to the goals for 2030. But Germany is a country that loves debating. And and I may not be in agreement with all of this being said about debate, but we simply have to start. And by starting, we can see where we can get. But we also have to be able to recognize that we decided to set something up that doesn't work, and then we have to be able to admit that and to change it. What do energy-intensive companies need to do the hydrogen ramp-up? What are the framework conditions needed for this? Well, there are three things needed that have been mentioned. The regulatory framework, of course, simply has to be set up, finally. We need definitions, we need certification for green hydrogen, we need the rules for the production of green hydrogen, and the Commission has made some proposals. We have the two delegated legal acts that are being in public consultation right now. We will certainly gather lots of feedback with these that we will, of course, look into, and we will debate internally before we accept these legal acts as the Commission, and then, of course, Parliament and Council will have the opportunity to comment these legal acts. But at least this have been presented by the Commission, and Mr. Kozaniesko has already mentioned this, that the gas package and hydrogen package from December is being pushed forward. And it doesn't, not only does it have to happen, it's already happening. And starting funding for the first years where cost efficiency of electrolysis is not a given is obvious to everyone as well. The Commission has doubled the grants to the InvestEU funds to 3 billion this year alone. For this purpose, there will be specific calls for electrolysis installations for decarbonization projects in priority sectors such as steel. And InvestEU also has a lot of funding available for the member states. So I think we've taken some huge steps further in the past year because the Commission was very clear. We had to do this, so we have made progress. And the third point is very important from my point of view in industrial policy, is that we as Europe have a strategy for industrial policy where our technological leadership that we have with companies such as yours and others, that we go to a global leadership, that we don't repeat our mistakes from the past that we've had with solar energy, where the technology has been developed in Europe with a lot of European tax funding as well, but the production is not happening here. It has happened elsewhere. That's what we have to avoid. Commissioner Breton has contacted 20 CEOs of electrolyzer installation producers. He has invited them to Brussels to discuss how this can be avoided. We've published this joint declaration where the industry is committing to increase capacity in the European Union tenfold for the production of electrolyzer installations, and we agreed to set up proper framework conditions for this, and now we need to work on the supply chains to keep them integrated, efficient, and as European as possible. I would like to ask you one more thing about that's also connected to hydrogen, which is CCU and CCS, so utilization and storage of carbon. What's your position to this, especially as it relates to the ramp-up of hydrogen? Now, if you're talking about blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, our priority is clearly with green hydrogen, but at the same time, we have our hydrogen strategy in which we have clearly outlined that for transitionary periods, in the short to medium term, there is a role for blue hydrogen. For instance, in Germany, CCS, CCU is of course a necessity for that, but we see a lot of potential for CCU, but it will have to have certain limits, of course. As far as CCS is concerned, there are rules that we have submitted for this. This has to happen on a market-based level, but the storage has to be safe, and the priority has to be avoiding emissions, not storage of carbon. But the possibility of CCU, for example, as a factor, as a resource in producing synthetic fuel, and if I read this correctly, if I remember correctly, there is a part of the delegated legal act that 2036 carbon can only be taken from biofuels, natural sources, or from the air, and not from the steel industry or from the production of concrete. Why did you decide for that strategy? Now, I cannot directly respond to this. This is an industrial policy topic that I cannot really answer to, but these projects, these drafts are part of, are within public consultation for now, so the last word hasn't really been spoken yet. We're going to see what happens with that. Mr. Geiert, CCU, CCS is part of the carbon management strategy, as Mr. Pinkford has mentioned in North Rhine-Westphalia. What's the potential for that, also on a European level, in order to enable us to have more climate protection in the industry? I think there's quite a big potential. And hydrogen production majority of the parliament appeared to say, promote green hydrogen and do not discriminate against blue hydrogen. And if we have a quick ramp up, Dr. Lauber has given some figures for this, and he has quite impressed us with those figures. And we can simply not generate that amount of renewable power, be it in the EU or be it in our neighborhoods. We will simply not be able to get that in order to cover our increasing need for hydrogen. So we will need other sources. CCS projects have failed in Germany. That's a bit of a toxic topic in Armenia and a little bit in other member states. This is not quite as contentious. And if you look at the possibility for a circular economy where CO2 can play a part, I do believe that given that our goal is CO2 neutrality and not complete freedom of CO2, that we can bind CO2 and reintroduce it into industrial procedures and processes, it seems like a great alternative, and that's something we should not simply move away from. This is basically the same as reusable bottles. We are just reusing it, I can simply say. I can only support what you said. We need a circular economy for CO2. Synthetic fuels, synthetic natural gas, ideally based on renewable energies, electrolysis, H2. But where do we get the CO2 from? Now, in Germany, if we have an agreement with the countries that are in the Sun Belt that can produce that, and we get the LNG over there, we go from the Middle East to Wilhelmshaven, deposit the LNG, Salzgitter will give us CO2 with a pipeline or whoever. And because there are many industries, they simply have no alternatives. They cannot avoid producing CO2 because it's a waste product of their production process. And I'm willing to say that CO2 will become a product in the future. In Norway, this has been a topic for a long time, and it's an important factor in a circular economy. So you can have a ship that will transport natural gas from the Middle East to us. You can ship the CO2 that we have taken out with CCU or CCS, and you can ship it back, give it to the countries that produce H2, you can produce hydrogen, and combine it in order to produce synthetic gas. And this synthetic gas can be fed into the chain again and can bring it back to Germany. So there's a lot of potential here for everyone, and it's really like a returnable bottle. Like there's a system for this. And CO2 can become a product that we will need. Ms. Zuri, I would like to talk about the value creation chain and reaching our climate goals. We will need green hydrogen, but you've already touched upon this a little earlier. We will have to build huge electrolysis installations, but you will need the clients, you will need the transport routes, the infrastructure for this. So you simply need a holistic view on this, because if you build these installations and nobody can buy them, this will not help you in any way. So where do you start in this value creation chain? Where do you start thinking and acting on all levels at the same time? You've said it yourself earlier, we have to have a holistic approach to this. This is the classic chicken and egg dilemma. Because if we want to be a future producer of green hydrogen, we can start. But if our clients in the steel industry aren't ready and aren't able to pay, simply because the regulatory framework hasn't been set up and because they aren't supported by carbon contracts or such things that can close the cost gap, at least in a temporary way, until we can reach competitiveness. And we also have to have a level of cooperation with people with people in transport, because they need to understand what kind of volume has to be fed into the system. And only when we have all of that, a project can function. We have integrated value chains. These are integrated projects, so we have to get competent people on all levels together. And if you allow, I will say it, because when Brussels and Mr. Guy has mentioned it, if we talk about the gas market package. This is a great package. Your classic gas provider, controlling the gas pipeline network, is asking himself, at what point there is an incentive to repurpose infrastructure? Because we have gas pipelines that transport natural gas, and these, of course, contain methane molecules, which are bad. And in the future, we want to have hydrogen in there, and we should be open to this in order to ramp up. And we have to be able to get the hydrogen to the people. But what is the incentive for the owners of those pipelines if they know that in North Rhine-Westphalia, starting 2030, I will not be allowed to participate anymore? Because the rules are so strict in this, much stricter for hydrogen than they are for methane or for natural gas as a whole. And of course, there are the challenges by my potential partners. So even if I could overcome this obstacle, how can I present this in an efficient way within my company? Because they have to have very different departments, very different teams, one for the transport of natural gas and another department for the transport of hydrogen. This is certainly not optimized economically speaking. And that's just to give you a brief example. And if I want an integrated project, we as future producers of green hydrogen, we are very interested in a delegated legal act. Now, a draft has been made available 2 weeks ago. It took a long time, but at least we have a draft now. And to be very clear, it's throttling the hydrogen economy in Europe. This will not allow us to reach climate neutrality in Germany or in Europe or in northwestern Europe. And that's not all. We run the risk of deindustrialization simply because the draft has been set up in a very dogmatic style. It's inflicting criteria on the producers, because we will want to use green energy, but we cannot use already existing installations, because a green electron is not a green electron. Why are new installations automatically better? Why would they think that they have to be pragmatic? And as the point of view, from the point of view of a producer, from the point of view of a potential client in the steel industry, and from those controlling the network for transport, the infrastructure, the pipelines, we all want more renewable energy in the system. But this will be left to the member states. Why is electrolysis be treated differently than the electric car that's simply plugged in? And nobody will drive me if my electric vehicle has been charged at what percentage it has been charged in a green way. And where do we start? Well, at RWE, we start everywhere at the same time, because all the pieces of the puzzle have to come together at the same time. And if we get the funding, if the IPCEI grants and all of this could be approved faster, we would maybe finally have a chance to promote hydrogen projects and to keep industry within Europe. Mr. Ehrenstein, would you like to react? Yeah, of course I have to react to this. Now, the purpose of a public consultation for this draft is that we can have this debate. And from our point of view, it's very important that we can weigh the different goals we have. So ramping up hydrogen that we're discussing right now, but there are other goals, energy efficiency and the efficiency of energy systems as a whole, as well as our goals for ramping up renewable energies as part of our energy mix that we also have to keep in mind. So there are maybe somewhat conflicting goals, and we have to find an equilibrium. And we think that the text that we have presented achieves that, but as I've already mentioned, it's the whole point of this discussion to get feedback. on our draft. As far as the gas package is concerned, we shouldn't really get into a detailed discussion of this at this point, but at least there are, let's say, divergent point of views if the unbundling is so much harder, so much more complicated than the horizontal unbundling requirements that existed prior to that. We don't see this quite as pessimistically as those who've presented it, but and as far as state aid is concerned, we are very aware that this has to be faster than it currently is. But for political reasons, there has been a pre-notification in recent years that happened very quickly, but hasn't led to a high quality of projects. In all cases, this has endangered the procedure as a whole a little because we have to make sure that there's a fair competition in the single market. This is not the case with you, but it has cases have existed elsewhere, and we want to have a first decision from the Commission to this, and I think that we will have a first group, and I think there will be a second group starting in autumn, and we are well aware that this has to happen quickly. But this is not only about state aid, this is also about innovation funds, cohesion funds, and other similar projects that, of course, will provide a lot of funding. Mr. Geyer, before I ask you if the European Commission is working in a sufficiently pragmatic way, I would also like to give you the possibility to ask questions, and we have questions from the room as well.
Herzlichen Dank, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Raphael von Heeremann, University of Antwerpen. I have a question. Years ago, there was this Desertec project. It started as a tiger, and it ended up completely harmless. And there were so many studies. Wouldn't it be now the time to revive this project? Because it's right next door, and it would fulfill many of the requirements that you've spoken about. Yes, from my point of view, clearly, yes. We've discussed this with Jörg Kinsens this afternoon, and Desertec was a great idea. And let's just take it up again. Because it's tackling the problem, where are we producing energy, and how do we transport the energy to the places where it's needed, to the industrial hubs that need it, that are elsewhere. And this is simply just jumping back to the discussion where we had at noon with Mr. Geyer. Would you like to add something, Mr. Geyer? Yes, Desertec. I think that started 20 years ago, and it was just 20 years ahead of its time. And now, amongst our North African neighbors, I personally would rather see this project in the Maghreb states rather than in the already very rich states in the Arabian Peninsula. And I think if we invest massively into the production of green energy and, of course, as a consequence, green hydrogen, that's some small steps. Really, there's already a gas pipeline between Algeria and the Iberian Peninsula. Now, I don't build pipelines. I don't know how quickly you can start to use these, but the pipelines have already been laid, and natural gas cannot go to France because they didn't want the interconnectors. But we could solve so many problems in a single stroke if we started this. And I can barely count it. And I am one of the people who don't believe that we will ever have enough energy in the European Union produced within the European Union. Will always remain a net importer, which is why it is high time to diversify our energy suppliers, to develop alternatives quickly, and especially in North Africa.
Vielen Dank. Wir haben hier noch eine.
Thank you very much. Somebody else is asking for the floor here. Yes, hello. Good evening. From Euro Energy Research, I have a question on minimum quotes for greenhouse gases in transport. Some people are speaking about electrolysis processes. Many people are most of them are either in refineries because there are huge costs linked with CO2 emissions there. €500 a tonne. We're speaking here about €5-6 per kilogram for hydrogen. That's a lot. So is that not too expensive? Could we maybe spend money better? Secondly, are refineries taking the hydrogen from other sectors that need it in order for a proper transition? Well, how can we deal with this? Okay, nobody in particular you're asking, or whomever? That is a great question. In terms of financial ability, you spoke about the figures. We're seeing this with greenhouse minimums, that there is certain volatility with these certificates, and that's why this is such a long-term journey. Now, when it comes to hydrogen, it's good to know that there are buyers whom do not need to adapt or may not need to adapt too much. We already heard about facilities. When it comes to refineries, this is one concrete sector that shows that it can use, because it's easy to replace hydrogen with green hydrogen with this. This could be a perfect model because it really links to the frameworks of the project that we have together with different partners in terms of addressing infrastructure that will allow for other buyers and to actually provide for them. It could be a good platform. Thank you very much. Another question. Yes. I want to thank you for the input that you shared. It was great for you to delve into the topic and allow for us to have a better grasp of it. Now, in terms of political implementation, I want to understand why we had the technology 2 decades ago. Now, CO2 emissions has gone up exponentially. It's continuing to do so, given the fact that Norway and Westphalia is a highly industrialized area. There is a huge amount of energy involved. Now, you already indicated that other countries are far ahead of us. Could you maybe explain what they have done better, in particular when it comes to hydrogen technology? Why is Germany playing a mediocre role to this point? And when it comes to speaking about political responsibility, could you be more specific, not just about administrative red tape aspects? Thank you. Yes. So, I'll speak about the country Norway. I, back in the day, worked on a glass platform there. At that time, we built expanders, and whenever there was a shutdown, the plant managers came to me and said 30 years ago he made his calculations and he said, look, I'm paying this amount of money. What do I mean to say with that? Well, 30 years ago, they were already speaking about CO2 management and they were already pushing for a transformation. Given their reality, today Norway is ahead of the game. CO2 is actually a product. They're using it. CCS and CCU is not the same as it is in Germany, that maybe for different reasons. Why are we discussing it today? I think you already mentioned this. Back then, in Germany, the discussion revolved around people who wanted to move away from using coal, others who wanted to ramp up renewables. And when we're speaking about CCU and CCS, that was before coal. I think now we're looking at moving away. Of course, that's important. But what we didn't manage to do was this 2012 CO2 storage law, we didn't allow for us to really act in Germany in terms of storage or reuse. That needs to be put on the table again. We need to address this again. And mechanisms, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was at a panel. The Norwegian ambassador was there, and he spoke about this mechanism that I mentioned. And he spoke about Germany, the German government, how we could move forward. We discussed way too much, and we lost our opportunity over the past 2 decades to really use this type of mechanism that I mentioned. Allow me just briefly. So yes, seeing this from afar, I think the CCS topic is back on the agenda in Germany, to be honest. So I'm full of hope right now. Apologies. You're asking what other countries do better than Germany. Well, this comparison, within the EU at least, let's be honest, it depends. Given on geographical situations, there are differences. There can be better prices offered in Norway than in North Rhine-Westphalia because geographical circumstances. You need to look at this fairly, I believe. On top of that, looking at projects in Germany, I don't think we can say that Germany is so behind is falling behind to such a degree, like you are saying. Yes, of course, there is a need for energy imports, and that's why we are focusing so much on hydrogen import more than other countries, just like Spain or Portugal, that have domestic resources to a degree that we don't. I see this completely different. My clients are not just in Germany. I'm in Berlin so often, and sometimes I feel as though I'm not being heard. We have projects outside of Germany, outside of Europe, and I'm really quite fearful. I'm fearful because I'm responsible for 14,000 people here, that the Americans and Chinese are going to take the lead. They are already bringing projects to bear, and we are discussing projects. Do you understand that? I'm sorry that I'm being so blunt like this. We can't act this way. Let us, please, bring our projects to bear and stop talking about them. Let's just say that we're going to have thousands of small projects. No. Today, we need to grow big projects. We can't act the way we've been doing up to now. We need to build factories we need to be able to build factories. We have the technology, but unfortunately, I think we trip over our own hurdles. If we have individual conversations, people say, yes, you're right, but it's like some type of paralysis. You mentioned this before, this question of approval procedures. Everyone says, I'm right, but then why is that the case then? Why are we doing it this way? Now there's pressure. It's high enough, I believe, really. Given the Ukraine crisis, we're seeing things that we never could have imagined before. And I believe it's really quite a pity that we needed to have a crisis of this nature for us to act. But it is food for thought. And we need to really now try and think about how we can support our procedures so that we can really actually do something and achieve something at the end of the day. Okay, another question. Hello. I'm from the Center for European Policy. Today, I'm taking away that Europe, when it comes to hydrogen and green hydrogen, is that we're not going to be able to actually produce it ourselves, that we're going to need it from outside. Here, not too far away, but maybe even further away. I have a practical question given that. You mentioned the Ukraine crisis. LNG imports. When it comes to transport, very technically, are we going to do it in pipe? Are we going to do pipeline? Are we going to do it with ships? How are we going to do this? Do we have the capacity to do that? What extent are we speaking of here, to be honest? I think we're going to have a different approach here with hydrogen, really. What dimensions can you imagine here, really, given the situation? Energy. The energy content is the decisive factor. We should look at the temperature factor, for example. I believe that in regions, when it comes to where we can produce hydrogen at a reasonable cost is what we need to do. That's why I'm asking us. Let us have synthetic SNG because we have the infrastructure. You have operators. We have pipelines, for example. So we can transport LNG as such. The technology exists, but whether or not we have enough capacity across the globe is a different thing. I can't answer that, but we do have the infrastructure. Then we have ammoniac, for example. Methane can be transported quite easily because it's atmospheric. And when it comes to hydrogen, it's much smaller than natural gas. Burning hydrogen in a particular machine is something we can think about. These are things we have to understand. This will be happening. These molecules. Now, this is not just affecting those in the ship industry or the steel industry. Hydrogen is a currency in its own self. That's why we need to act where there are no other alternatives. There are alternatives for certain sectors. Look, we have battery, for example, for freight. We can do that. And this is why this is so emotional when it comes to hydrogen. Whom will get their hands on hydrogen first? Who comes first? Who comes second? At the end of the day, we need renewable sources. And it goes back to the question, the regions where we can do best. We can do a lot here, yes. We have wind farms, of course. We need to set up electrolysis facilities where we can keep the grid stable. But again, our laws can place hurdles. Many people say it's stupid, but we're not changing things, or we're changing things way too slowly, to be honest. Thank you so much, Dr. Lauber. We have no other questions, and we are running out a bit of time, to be honest. So that's why I would like to go back to what you were saying, Mr. Gaia. You said that this is like changing the wheels of a train when it's at full speed. So what would you like us to see if we were to come together once again, if everything were able to work well with this locomotive?
We should find a way to a situation on all political levels where we can quickly expand and ramp up renewable energies at the same time. And thankfully, this has finally been started, reach a diversified energy foreign policy. So looking where we get the energy from, how we get it over here. Dr. Lauber, you've mentioned this. If it's so we can build pipelines to Morocco and Tunisia. Why not get hydrogen from there? But that's not the topic I'm talking about. Second point, that was the second point. Third point, we need to get business case, set up business case, and I have to say a few words about unbundling. I've not found anyone, Mr. Stein, who was able to explain to me how the regulations in the gas package can help hydrogen. We cannot say on the one hand that companies set up a network to transport hydrogen, but they have to get rid of it by 2030. And of course, I'm simplifying, but that's what it boils down to. And you'll have to be a fool to invest in that. And nobody can explain to me why this would be right. The only ones who are in favor of these plans are the regulatory authorities. We have to become more pragmatic for this. And we simply have to start. There are plans of projects in the pipeline, so to speak, which can lead to hubs, to core segments of the hydrogen industry. And I think next year we will be a lot further, especially if the IPSOLs become approved. And a lot of things will be in movement, a lot will be invested. We are already at a point where investment windows are already closing. And we cannot let this opportunity, let this chance go by. Start everywhere and quickly and decisively. Mr. Einstein, what's the role of the Commission here? You have to take on responsibility. Well, as has already been said, we need to set up a regulatory framework. That's what we're doing. There are different approaches, different point of views have been presented. There are other point of views as well. And I think we will certainly be a lot further in a year's time with the Parliament and the Council, with all proposals being put on the table, being discussed. We'll certainly move a lot further. And I'm, let's say, a lot more optimistic than the other participants in this panel discussion. As far as imports are concerned, I think that middle distance, Northern Africa, pipelines to import hydrogen, and the bigger projects at a longer distance are mostly indeed ammonia-based, because it can be utilized by the industry, and it makes economical sense given current gas prices. But politically and economically, our efforts are being favored, and we're going to use this. Are you just as optimistic, Dr. Suri? I maintain a positive outlook. I think that we do not have a problem of recognition or acceptance in politics. It's simply a problem of implementation. And it's very important to say, what are we supposed to do in Europe? We simply need to reach a level of general maturity for hydrogen. Be it the delegated 3.2 or the gas market package, or we're working on our thesis before we finished school, in essence, is what we're doing. And we have to do things in the proper order. We've heard a lot of arguments. The industry is ready, and hydrogen producers are ready, electrolysis facility producers are ready, and we should simply start with the first step. Thank you. Dr. Lauber, you have the floor for closing remarks. I think we can only work on this together. It's not helpful to say all fault lies with the politicians. We can only achieve this together with the industry and with politicians. And we have to work on this pragmatically. We have to we can't simply just pass the buck. We have to work together pragmatically, look at our problems, to tackle them and overcome them. That is what I would wish for, that we can shape policy together with the politicians, the representatives of the companies, the industry, to simply just lock us all up in a nice room over a weekend until we can send out the white smoke, as they say, to simply realize things, implement it, and stop talking them to death. That's a great idea, the great image with the white smoke. I'll announce the new Pope traditionally. So thank you very much for this very informative discussion, for your in-depth contributions to all of you. Thanks to all of you for coming and listening. I would like to invite you to a small reception in the room right behind us, where our guests may even be available for a quick little chat. And I wish you all have a very nice evening here in Brussels. Thanks once again for coming.